saying to farmers, this tax change will not come into force under a Labour government. Now you're in government, you changed your mind. Can you see why they are falling at the trail?
Well, we inherited a £22 billion black hole from the previous government, and the previous Chancellor of the Exchequer covered the scale of that problem up. So none of us knew how difficult the problem would be when we were coming into government. But this government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. But we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances, otherwise we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Farmers up and down the country are saying that when they get this bill, which they weren't expecting, it could put them out of business. Do you accept that it will put some farms out of business, and what do you say to those people who are worried about it?
Well, the vast majority of farms will not be affected. The data from HMRC is actual data from the last year that we actually have real data available, projected forwards. It shows that no more than around 500 farms would be affected. The vast majority of farms will pay nothing more under the new scheme, and that's not just the Treasury saying that. It's been validated by the independent Office for Budget Responsibility and by the independent financial think tank, the IFS. So there are a lot of figures flying around that I do not recognise. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more.
Would you advise farmers, when it comes to this issue of inheritance tax, if they can't pay it because they don't have the money, would you advise them to sell their land? And do you accept that some farmers will have to sell their land, and it could go to developers or big corporations, it could change the face of the British countryside?
The vast majority of farms will pay no more under the current scheme than they under the new scheme than they do under the current scheme.
Talking about the ones who will have to pay it.
Well, those the only ones that will be affected, and it will be around 500, will be the very wealthiest or the biggest farms. They can plan their tax affairs just like any other business plans their tax affairs as well. But I would point out to them again, this government is on the side of farming. We've just allocated £5 billion to farming. That's the biggest budget in our country's history for sustainable farming. The vast majority of farms will not be affected by these changes to inheritance tax, but it's only right we ask the very wealthiest to pay their fair share. Otherwise, we can't fix services like the National Health Service that farmers rely on and people living in rural communities just like everybody else.
Lots of protesters here today, including, as many people know, Jeremy Clarkson, who's very much against this, leading the charge against it. Do you have a message for him?
Well, it's very important that we listen to farmers, but I would say to farmers, this government is backing farming in the UK. That's why we've allocated the biggest budget in our country's history, £5 billion towards sustainable food production. And these changes in inheritance tax, we're only asking the very wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. The vast majority of farms will pay nothing more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
And just on a different issue, the winter fuel payment has been a very difficult issue for this Labour government so far, and lots of some of the poorest pensioners saying that they are going to struggle to pay their bills. Scottish Labour have said that they would like to reinstate it. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm a big supporter of devolution. Devolution means different countries in the UK can do things differently. So Scottish Labour have made their choice. If they win the election in Scotland, that's what they will do.
Some farmers have disparagingly called you City Steve. Is there a problem with Labour, with this government understanding rural affairs?
Well, this Labour government has just allocated £5 billion to support sustainable food production in the UK. That's the biggest budget of that kind in our country's history, and it shows that we're backing farmers. And we've gone further than that as well, 60 million to help farmers affected by flooding. We're going to cut farmers' energy bills by setting up GB Energy. We're going to seek a new trade deal with the European Union so we can get food exports moving across the border again. And we're launching the first ever cross-government rural crime strategy. All of that shows farmers that this is a government on their side, and the changes to inheritance tax will affect only around 500 farms. The vast majority of farmers will pay nothing more.
And there is a big disparity between, as you say, around 500 farms a year being affected and the numbers being claimed by the likes of the NFU. How do you explain that disparity? Is it a failure of government communications, or are farmers being misled?
Well, the government's been very clear. About 500 farms will be affected, and the vast majority of farmers will pay nothing more under the new scheme. That figure has been validated now by the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility and by the independent financial think tank, the IFS. There are all sorts of other figures flying around that I don't recognise, but if farmers look at the facts, they will see the vast majority of them will pay nothing more under the new scheme than they did under the old scheme.